Imagine waking up tomorrow and your gas station is empty. Not because of a strike. Not because of bad weather. But because one of the narrowest stretches of water on Earth, a choke point just 21 miles wide, is completely shut. No tankers in. No tankers out. 21 miles separating the world from a global economic collapse. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This is happening right now. And almost nobody is talking about what comes next. Welcome back. If you're new here, this channel breaks down the geopolitical and military events that are quietly reshaping your world, your economy, and your future. I'm glad you're here, because what we're covering today is one of the most consequential crises unfolding on the planet right now. The Strait of Hormuz, the single most important waterway for global oil and gas, has been effectively shut down due to escalating conflict in the region. In the next 12 to 15 minutes, you're going to understand why this strait matters more than any pipeline, any oil field, any trade deal on Earth. What military and political events led to this shutdown? How it's already hitting you, at the pump, at the grocery store, in your economy. And what the next 90 days could look like, including the scenarios that keep analysts awake at night. If you find this kind of in-depth analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We don't do clickbait. We do depth. Let's get into it. Let's start with geography, because if you don't understand why this strait matters, nothing else will make sense. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow channel of water between Oman and Iran. At its narrowest point, it's just 33 kilometers, about 21 miles, wide. But inside that tiny corridor moves roughly 20% of all the world's oil. Every single day. We're talking about approximately 17 to 21 million barrels of oil passing through daily, along with massive quantities of liquefied natural gas, primarily from Qatar, which supplies Europe and Asia. Think about that for a moment. 1 in every 5 barrels of oil consumed on this planet passes through a channel you could swim across in under 2 hours. There is no backup plan. The alternative routes, the East-West pipeline through Saudi Arabia, the Sund pipeline through Egypt, they can handle, at best, a fraction of that volume. Maybe 5 million barrels a day combined. The rest? It has no other way out. The countries most exposed to a Hormuz shutdown are Japan, South Korea, India, and China, all of which import more than 60% of their oil through this choke point. Europe isn't immune either. A supply shock here sends shockwaves into global commodity markets within days. So when we say the Strait of Hormuz is shut, we're not talking about a regional inconvenience. We're talking about the economic equivalent of cutting the oxygen line to the global economy. Now let's talk about how this happened. Because this isn't a sudden event. It's the result of years, decades, of escalating tension. The Strait of Hormuz has always been a flashpoint. Iran has long threatened to close it in times of conflict. But what's different now is the convergence of multiple crises happening simultaneously. Iran sits on the northern shore of the strait. It has sophisticated anti-ship missile batteries, naval mines, fast attack boats, and submarine capabilities all positioned along that coastline. For years, Iran has used what military strategists call asymmetric warfare, not trying to defeat the U.S. Navy in a conventional battle, but threatening to make the strait unusable for everyone. The strategy is simple and terrifying: you don't have to win a naval battle to close the strait. You just have to make it too dangerous for tankers to pass through. A single mine. A single missile strike on a supertanker. And the insurance industry, the shipping companies, and the energy markets react within hours. The immediate escalation came after a series of strikes, the details of which are still contested by multiple governments, that crossed a red line in the region. Iranian-aligned forces launched coordinated drone and missile attacks on U.S. military installations and allied naval assets in the Gulf. The U.S. responded with targeted strikes on Iranian military infrastructure. Iran retaliated by deploying naval mines into the shipping lanes and issuing a formal closure notice through the strait, a move that was previously considered a threat, never an action. International maritime organizations declared the route effectively impassable. Insurance underwriters suspended coverage. Within 48 hours, tanker traffic dropped by over 80%. There's a chilling phrase in military strategy, escalation dominance. It means, whoever can keep escalating without flinching holds the power. Right now, no one is flinching. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Let's talk about what this means for you. Right now. Today. Within the first 72 hours of the effective closure, crude oil prices surged past $120 a barrel. Analysts at major financial institutions are already forecasting prices of $140 to $180 per barrel if the closure extends beyond 30 days. That's not just a number on a trading screen. That number has a direct line to your daily life. In Europe and Asia, gas prices are already seeing the sharpest single-week increases in over a decade. In countries that subsidize fuel, governments are burning through emergency reserves. In the United States, which produces a significant portion of its own oil, the insulation is partial, but crude is a global commodity. A supply shock anywhere reverberates everywhere. Here's the part most people don't connect: modern agriculture runs on oil. Fertilizers, pesticides, transportation, refrigeration. Every step of getting food from a farm to your table is energy dependent. A 50% spike in oil prices historically correlates with a 15 to 25% rise in food prices within 3 to 6 months. For wealthy nations, that's painful. For the 800 million people already living in food insecurity, it's catastrophic. Don't sleep on the liquefied natural gas angle. Qatar is the world's largest LNG exporter, and the vast majority of its exports flow through, you guessed it, the Strait of Hormuz. Europe, which spent years diversifying away from Russian gas after the Ukraine war, pivoted heavily to Qatari LNG. Now that supply line is in jeopardy. European gas storage levels, which were carefully managed heading into winter, are now under intense pressure. The irony? Europe replaced one dangerous dependency with another. Now let's step back and look at the military dimensions, because this isn't just an economic story. It's a strategic one. The United States has positioned 2 carrier strike groups in the region. That's an enormous show of force. Each carrier group represents more air power than most nations' entire air forces. The U.S. Navy is also conducting what it calls freedom of navigation operations, essentially sending warships through the contested zone to assert that international maritime law still applies. But here's the tension: asserting the right to pass through the strait militarily is very different from making it safe for unarmed civilian tankers. The mines are still there. The missile batteries are still online. Iran knows it cannot defeat the United States militarily in a conventional sense. That's not the goal. The goal is to impose costs, economic, political, reputational, that make military escalation politically unsustainable in Washington and in allied capitals. And it's working. Already, oil-importing nations in Asia are quietly sending diplomatic backchannels. The pressure on the U.S. to negotiate is immense. Iran is also watching something else carefully: the domestic politics of the United States. An energy price shock heading into an election cycle is a powerful lever. Here's a dimension that isn't getting nearly enough attention. China imports roughly 40% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. A prolonged closure doesn't just hurt China's economy, it destabilizes the political calculations of the Chinese Communist Party, which has built its domestic legitimacy on delivering economic growth. China has back-channel relationships with Iran that no Western nation has. It's one of Iran's largest trading partners and has resisted international sanctions pressure for years. The question analysts are quietly asking: is Beijing using its influence to quietly de-escalate behind the scenes? Or is Beijing calculating that a weakened, oil-starved West benefits its long-term strategic position? That answer is worth watching very closely. Alright. So where does this go from here? Analysts, wargamers, and intelligence agencies are modeling three primary scenarios. Let me walk you through each one. In this scenario, back-channel diplomacy, likely involving Qatar, Oman, or China as intermediaries, produces a face-saving agreement. Iran gets some concessions, a relaxation of sanctions, a diplomatic acknowledgement of its regional security concerns. The US gets a commitment to reopen the strait. Oil prices stabilize. The world exhales. Markets recover. Slowly. This scenario is possible. But it requires both sides to want de-escalation more than they want to win the moment, and right now, domestic politics on both sides are pushing against compromise. This is the scenario most analysts consider most likely. The strait remains functionally closed, not completely, but too dangerous for normal commercial traffic. The global oil market adapts, painfully. Spare capacity from Saudi Arabia, UAE, and US shale production ramps up, but it cannot fully compensate. Oil settles between $130 and $160 a barrel. Global inflation spikes. Several emerging market economies with heavy dollar-denominated debt face crisis-level stress. The human cost in the global south, where energy and food costs consume 40 to 60% of household income, would be severe. Meanwhile, the military standoff continues. Small incidents. Near misses. Each one a potential spark. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to sensationalize. But responsible analysis means we have to look at the worst case. A single incident, an accidental strike on a civilian vessel, a misidentified aircraft, a technical malfunction, could trigger a rapid escalation that neither side intended but both sides cannot walk back from. In this scenario, direct U.S. military strikes on Iranian soil would almost certainly draw in Iranian proxy forces across Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. The strait would be shut for months. Oil could spike past $200 per barrel. The global recession triggered by such an event would be the worst since the 1930s. Again, this is the low probability scenario. But in geopolitics, low probability and zero probability are not the same thing. Let's bring this home. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just a shipping lane. It's the jugular vein of the global economy. For decades, we built a world that runs on oil, and then we built that oil supply around one of the most politically volatile regions on Earth. That was always a vulnerability. Today, it's a crisis. Here's what we know right now. 1. The strait is effectively closed to safe commercial traffic. This is not a drill. 2. Global oil and gas prices are rising sharply, and the full economic impact is still weeks away from being felt by ordinary people. 3. The military situation is a standoff with no clear exit ramp. Both sides are playing for leverage, not quick resolution. 4. The countries and people most exposed to this crisis are not the ones in the headlines. They're in South Asia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, places where energy poverty was already a daily reality. 5. The next 60 to 90 days are critical. The decisions made in back-channel meetings, in trading rooms, and in military command centers will determine whether this becomes a manageable crisis or a generational one. What you can do, as an individual, as a citizen, is stay informed. Understand the systems that your life depends on. Demand that your political leaders have coherent, long-term strategies for energy independence. Because crises like this don't come from nowhere. They come from decades of short-term thinking. And the only way to avoid the next one is to start thinking differently right now. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what's happening and why it matters, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to see this analysis. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of events like this. We cover the stories that most mainstream media reduces to headlines, and we give you the depth to actually understand them. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think this crisis ends in negotiation, or escalation? Drop your analysis below. Some of the most insightful takes I've ever read came from this community. For your next watch, I've linked a video above on how the last major Hormuz crisis in 2019 nearly became something far worse, and what stopped it. That context is essential right now. Stay sharp. Stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.